Thank you for that introduction. As Lucy stated, I am Penny McVicker. I'm the Executive Director of Victim Services at Brant and a longtime participant on the Brant Elder Abuse Awareness Committee. I have served time there as chair and as past chair. So it's a really good committee, and we do a lot of good work in the community in terms of educating around the issue of elder abuse. So what are some of the things that we're going to be learning today? We're going to recognize warning signs of abuse. We're going to recognize ageism. We're going to talk about how to respond safely and supportively, and help to identify that the little things that each one of us can do can make a big difference to somebody who is in a situation where they might be being abused, and how to find help in your community. So I want you by the end of this presentation to be able to recognize and respond to signs of abuse and to know how to get help. You are the most powerful being in the world, and most people just don't know it. Many people can feel very powerless to make social change. This is an idea we're challenging today. Small, kind actions can make a difference, and they can add up. They matter. Think about a time when someone said something mean to you. How long did that stay with you? That's impact. Think next about a time someone said something kind to you, and how did that make you feel? And maybe you had no idea what they said made such a big difference. That's also impact. Your smallest action has an impact of some kind. The challenge is to be thoughtful, responsible, and intentional about the kind of impact you have, and to make sure that it's a positive one. Let's look at what each one of us can do to support older adults who may be experiencing abuse or neglect. I think it's important that, that we all learn to be aware and to keep our eyes open and to be mindful of warning signs. And that's some of what we're going to talk about today. Everyone has the right to be safe and free from abuse or neglect. And we have a shared responsibility to create a safe, strong, and healthy community. And I think it's important that we all understand that we have a role to play, and every person has their unique contribution that they can make to help keep our community safe. People who experience abuse need support, and people who behave abusively are accountable for their actions, but they may not even recognize their behavior as abusive behavior, especially if it's within a family. Neighbors, friends, and family can make a difference. We can do a lot to help people understand what is abusive behavior, and to let us know that even as bystanders, we do have the ability to help make change. When people have trouble in their relationships, you might be their neighbor, their friend, or their family member who can make a positive difference. If you are concerned that an older person in your life may be experiencing abuse, this information can help you to recognize the warning signs and to let them know what to do. And I will tell you, with Victim Services at Brant, we often have neighbors, friends, and family that call us because they have concerns about someone that they know and care about, that they feel may be experiencing signs of abuse. So let's talk about ageism. What is ageism? Ageism is often a very large factor in abuse. It's discrimination against older adults because they are older. It's often used to describe attitudes and beliefs that lead other people to treat older people as if they're less important or less valued because they are older. And these attitudes are often factors in abusive situations. And oftentimes seniors themselves can feel that they're not as important or as valued. And that's oftentimes leads to them being accepting of abuse. Ageism happens when you make up your mind about a group of people and what they're like because of their age. We all have ageist attitudes. Have you ever thought to yourself, kids today spend too much time on the computers? Or have you followed behind a slow driver and thought, it must be an old person? Or sometimes people even take it worse and they'll say it must be a woman. These are examples of ageism because they make a general statement about all young people or all old people. That can't possibly be true. We all have ageist attitudes. Anytime you hear yourself say those people or they, always, never, try to hear the generalizations that you're making as a stereotype that does a disservice to individuals and contributes to perpetuating the isms, whether it be ageism, racism, sexism, etc. Stereotyping is very common, and we have to make an effort to recognize it in ourselves first. So what do we know? And these are some statistics from an online survey on the internet by the International Federation on Aging. And they're a bit older, but I think they're still very valid. It was from 2012. Ageism is the most tolerated form of social prejudice. 63% of seniors say that they've been treated unfairly or differently because of age. 79% agree seniors are seen as less important. And 21% see older Canadians as a burden. And those are really kind of sobering statistics when we think about it, especially as we see our population is aging. Well-meaning family and friends sometimes push older adults to do things they don't want to do. We've often heard many stories about adult children who start to make decisions for their parents because they want to help. Or they feel a sense of urgency to solve what they see as a problem for their parents. Unless there's a clear safety issue or diminished mental capacity, the older adult has the right to choose and make their life decisions. Even if there are capacity issues, the older person should have the right to be heard and be respected, even if their concerns cannot always be accommodated. Ageist assumptions run far and wide in our society about what it means to be older. Many people unconsciously or consciously link aging to becoming dependent, weak, and less important. All Canadians need to become aware of how and when we treat people as if they have less value because of their age. Now let's talk about abuse and how that falls in line with ageism. Abuse is an equalizer. We all struggle when abuse shows up in relationships of people we know and care about. It's a personal relationship, and this It's Not Right program is all about preparing us as neighbors, friends, and family members, as responders, as bystanders, those who are most likely to know that abuse may be happening. This session is focused on education and skill building for bystanders. We all struggle with what to do when abuse shows up in a relationship of people we know and care about. It can be especially difficult for people in the helping profession because they feel a lot of pressure to know what to do. It doesn't matter how much you know, you will struggle like everyone does. That's why we need to support each other and talk about what is happening in a safe and respectful way. What is abuse of older adults? Abuse is harm caused by an older adult or caused to an older adult by someone who limits or controls their rights or freedoms. And the older adults are unable to freely make choices because they're afraid of being hurt, humiliated, left alone, or the relationship ending. It's often an imbalance of power. Abuse is not just impolite or rude behavior. It is abuse when one person uses power or influence to take advantage of or to control the older adult. Neglect of older adults who cannot manage on their own is also abuse. An abusive relationship is different from situations where two people are in conflict with each other. In conflict, people may do things to hurt each other, they may call each other names, and fights can escalate to violence. However, both people have power in the relationship. One person does not live in fear of the other. Their rights and freedoms are not oppressed. Both parties are able to make choices about what happens next. People need help and support in these situations, but they are not being abused in the way we are going to focus on in this presentation, where abusive tactics are used by one person, deliberately or unintentionally, to exert or maintain power over another person in a way that controls that other person's movements and choices. And when we talk about domestic violence, we can't forget about, or when we talk about elder abuse, we can't forget about domestic violence. Domestic violence is very much included as part of elder abuse. Stats Canada, these statistics are from Stats Canada in 2015. But there's also the Domestic Violence Death Review Committee does a regular report, and they often cover issues related to domestic violence among our senior population. From the Domestic Violence Death Review Committee report, it states that the older population has the lowest rate of domestic violence when compared to younger groups. However, it's still a societal problem, with close to 3,000 individuals over the age of 55 being victims of police-reported spousal violence in Canada in 2011. It's also important to note that similar to younger age groups, the large number of older victims do not report the violence that they experience. So just as with younger domestic violence situations, stats would show that there are, on average, 6 to 10 incidents of violence before the police are ever called. And that stat would hold true with older people as well. It's been found that older women have different experiences with domestic violence that younger women do. They're less likely to report the abuse or seek help. They are more likely to self-blame and take the responsibility for the abuse on themselves. They're more likely to report a health condition related to the abuse, and they are more likely to have anxiety or depression or have a physical illness. It also tends to be more emotionally, physically, and finally, they also tend to be more physically, financially, and emotionally dependent on the abuser. It's important to consider the barriers older women face as well. They may have been raised in a society where mental health was stigmatized, domestic violence was a private matter, and help was not often sought out. Just get that off the screen. So because of this invisibility around older individuals, domestic violence can happen in a much more isolated way for seniors, older women, and these barriers may make leaving the violence before it escalates even more difficult. So I think that those are things that everyone needs to keep in mind in regards to domestic violence and seniors when we're going through this presentation. As I said before, abuse is a power imbalance. Abuse is a misuse of that power, and it can make the person experiencing it feel small, alone, and powerless. And sometimes victims live in fear every day of their abuser. So what is abusive behavior? Abuse is not just physical violence. It can also be verbal, emotional, financial, sexual, or spiritual. And it can also involve self-neglect too. Abusive behavior can be subtle and hard to see in many cases, or it can be raging and terrifying. And the individual being abused may feel that they're very much everything that they do and say is being controlled, including what happens with their financial resources. So what are some of the warning signs? And these are warning signs that we want everyone to be able to recognize. A warning sign does not automatically mean that abuse is happening, so don't jump to conclusions. A warning sign should flag your attention to look more closely and ask questions. So if I tell you I'm being abused, believe me. They may become depressed or withdrawn or fearful. So if you see, somebody that you know and you see a change in their behaviors and in their mental state, it could be that they are being a victim of elder abuse. They may stop attending social events or church. Someone may move in with them suddenly to take care of them and take care of their home. You may see signs of neglect, such as no food in the house. Their phone might get cut off, or things might start disappearing from their house. We often hear of that with some of the people that call us, that prized possessions in their home are being taken by people that come to visit them, thinking that they're entitled to them. And they may have injuries that they can't explain. All of these are just some of the warning signs of abuse. Controlling behavior is a very important thing to be aware of. Making all the decisions without asking, isolating the individual from their family or friends, threats of violence or abandonment if the individual that's abusing them doesn't get what they want, a total disregard for their privacy, reading or withholding their mail, or maybe controlling who they're able to talk to on the phone, handling all the money, and putting locks on the outside of doors so people are locked in. These are some ways it shows up in relationships. Abusive behavior happens on a continuum. If you give someone the silent treatment, you're using controlling behavior to make something happen. If you call someone names, it's abusive behavior. When abusive behavior is coupled with an imbalance in power, the behavior is being used in a way to control or dominate the other person. Then we're talking about an abusive relationship. This is not an exhaustive list by any means of what can be controlling behavior. So who's at risk of being abused? Basically, abuse can happen to any person at any age. There's a stereotype that abuse of older persons only happens on dependent, frail, elderly people, and this is very much a myth. Abuse often happens to capable, fully functioning older adults, and abuse can happen to any person at any age. People are usually ashamed to find themselves in an abusive relationship. How did this happen to me? How did I get here? These are common questions. Abuse is never the fault of the person being abused. Why are some people more at risk? People who are abused are often isolated, and isolation is a very important factor in abusive relationships. For people caught in an abusive relationship, as the escalation of the abuse escalates, the isolation can become deeper and more profound because they're cut off from more and more of their friends and families and other supports that may be available to them in the community. So why are some people more at risk? People who are abused are often isolated. They may be isolated because of their culture or language. It could be that the person abusing them is keeping them away from the people that can help them and support them. And as I said, as abuse escalates, they can become more and more isolated. Some of the most common risk factors for abuse is, first of all, depression. As someone becomes more depressed, they become easier to control and manipulate. Previous history of abuse, trauma as a child, or youth, or adult. If they've been in a domestic violence relationship or they've grown up in an abusive household, they're more susceptible to abuse. And being female is another very common risk factor. There are other risk factors too. They can have deteriorating health situation where one partner cares for the other, or a family member is taking over care. They might have addictions. Sometimes they play a role. Maybe their abuser is addicted to alcohol or drugs. Maybe the victim is as well. They could be living with someone who is dependent on them. Or they may be dependent on the person that they're living with. It could go either way. And they may have a cognitive impairment, which can make them more vulnerable to abuse. So there are some intersections of abuse as well. LGBTQ seniors may face social discrimination due to their age as well as their sexual orientation or gender identity. There may be an ongoing legacy of residential schools and colonization. Indigenous people are 6 times more likely to be killed. 20% of trans seniors have been physically or sexually abused for being trans. Women with disabilities are 4 times more likely to be sexually assaulted. And keep in mind that sexual assault is about power and control. Indigenous women make up 21% of all homicides in Canada. These are all very important stats, and these are from Stats Canada 2014, if anybody wants to look up any of those stats. But the numbers are still pretty consistent. So who behaves abusively towards older adults? Not everyone's a monster, but people we know. Could be your neighbor, it could be a family member, it could be a friend. People who are abusive can be unaware that their behavior is abusive, and or they can be charming, well-liked leaders in their communities in public and cruel behind closed doors. In some cases, the violence is targeted at a specific person, the older adult. The abuse can happen infrequently or every day. When violence is used to control or dominate another person, it's called coercive control. So who behaves abusively towards older adults? Most often it's family members. It could be adult children, grandchildren, nieces, great-grandchildren. It's primarily, it could be their partner. And people who behave abusively can also be other relatives or friends. They could be paid or unpaid caregivers. They can be landlords, financial advisors, or anyone in a position of power, authority, or trust. We had one woman that we dealt with that was in an abusive relationship with her neighbor. And the neighbor was getting her to sign and co-sign loans for them because they held the threat of not letting her see their children, and their children would always come over and see her and call her grandma. And she was very, very frightened of losing that relationship with those children. And that made her more susceptible to the abuse. So it's, we just never know who might be the abuser in these relationships. Gender and abuse. As men age, they experience abuse more often than younger men. Violence against older women is 22% higher than for older men. Women are more likely to be killed by their spouse. Men are more likely to be killed by an acquaintance. Trans seniors experience stigma and other forms of discrimination. And these are also very significant statistics to be aware of. So what makes you feel uncomfortable? I'm going to play a brief scenario in just a minute and watch for warning signs.
Are you sure you're going to be comfortable in the basement?
Yeah, there's plenty of room, Mom. Besides, your granddaughter will never do that. Your life's at a month.
I'm sure you're going to find another job.
Mind if I watch a movie?
By the way, your bank card was rejected at the gas station today. Really embarrassing.
What are you talking about?
I went to fill my car and it wouldn't go through. Must be overdrawn or something.
Better hope your check comes in this week. You're not going to get your prescriptions refilled. What are you doing?
I can't get used to the damp downstairs.
Oh, try another blanket, Mom. We're boiling up here.
I would have wished you would have asked me before you moved me into the basement.
Why? You have to be on my back, Mom. It's too dark and dingy down there. Get depressed, you know that. Play your puzzles down there as well as you can up here.
What's for dinner, Grams? I'm starving.
Oops. So what did you see? What were some of the warning signs? And I know that we can't have a discussion, but there's financial abuse that's going on. He's obviously taking her money and has her bank card and is using her resources. There's emotional abuse. They're, treating her like she doesn't have any rights in that house. It's her house. There's a disregard for the fact it is Carla's house. They've moved her downstairs. They have no regard for her privacy. They're reading and checking her mail as it comes in. Michael is dependent upon Carla as he is unemployed. They've been living together. He suffers from a depression. Alcohol abuse increases risk. At some point we saw that he was drinking. And this is an escalating situation. We can see how, he moved in and was very respectful, and as time went on, he took over more and more of the house and had no consideration for her or her rights within that house. What are the ageist attitudes that may impact in this scene? What is the entitlement on the part of the son? What is he, he seems to be very entitled that he has the right to whatever is Carla's. And that Carla is there to serve him and his daughter. There's tension between Carla and they're treating Carla like a child and just moving her things without asking to the basement. And she comes home and finds that, he's taken over the upstairs and she's now delegated to the basement in her own house. And sexism in the sense that women have less rights and are assumed to be the server for the family. The granddaughter asking, "What's for dinner, Grands? I'm hungry." And who has the power in this relationship? What are the dynamics? Michael has taken over the power. He assumes that his mother will mother him in his time of need, and he demands that. And Carla's feelings don't matter. He automatically assumes he can just use his mother's assets without asking. He feels entitled. And Carla's concern for Michael erodes her power. It's her son, and she loves her son, and she's wanting to help him in his time of need. Michael's breaking the law by taking over his mother's money and using her bank card. That's a criminal offense. That's fraud. He's using her resources, and he's modeling disrespect to his daughter. There's no undermining he's undermining his relationship with his mother by treating her with total disregard for her wants. He doesn't even care if she's cold in the basement because he doesn't want to be warm upstairs. And even when she was playing her puzzles, it didn't matter that she was there doing something. He just took over the space, feeling that it was his right. So these are some of the things that we just talked about. He's moved Carla downstairs, taking her money, disregard for her privacy. He feels entitled to mom's money, her home, her time, and her needs and wants are not important to him. There are many power imbalances in society. And women are often seen as the caretakers. Mothers are supposed to take care of their kids. That's the way we view our roles in the world. And Carla is trying to take care of her family. There's ageism, where younger people's needs are more important, and Michael is putting his needs before his mother's. There's ageism, as the elder adults are a burden and need help. Michael may believe he's actually helping his mother by being there in the house with her and looking after her in his way. And it's most likely that Carla is worried about her son and her granddaughter's future. She loves her son, and Michael loves his mom. Carla feels shame, and she may not want anyone to know what's happening in her house and the fact that her son has taken over her world. And Michael may not see his behavior as being abusive. He may see that this is his, it's his right to behave the way he is, and he's actually doing things to help his mother. And he may be, and to some extent, maybe he's running errands for her, doing other things. We don't have the full picture. But he might see that what he's doing is correct. His mom's retired and she wants his help. She has more time than he does, so doing things like cooking the meals might seem reasonable. She doesn't need the money. She's financially sound. She doesn't have to work, so she has flexibility. And he would not likely see himself as an abuser, and his mother probably wouldn't either. Carla will defend Michael and tell you that he's not a bad man, but his behavior is abusive, whether it's unintentional or deliberate. He is responsible for his actions. The relationship is quickly becoming defined by his behavior. Abuse and neglect happen on a continuum. We have to learn to recognize abusive behavior much earlier, both in ourselves and in other people. Research has shown us that if abusive behavior is not interrupted in some way, it will get worse. This is one of the things we want to change. We want people to recognize abusive behavior when it first starts to show up in relationships. Being able to name it as abuse is a big social change. How do you know if you are being abusive? If the person that you're interacting with is afraid of you, that's a sign that you're being abusive. If you're making all the decisions, if you think you know what's best for that person, for that older adult because they're older, and if you take their money or their possessions. So what is your impact? Abuse behavior is very common in our society. This presentation is going to give us the opportunity to raise awareness about how common it is and how even good intentions can sometimes be controlling. At the low end of the scale, just giving someone the silent treatment, as I said before, is abusive controlling behavior. Sometimes people are overwhelmed, frustrated, and maybe trying to get things done with what they believe are good intentions. So how do you know if your behavior is slipping into abuse, and what is your impact? Remember that we are all powerful beings and our every action has an impact. Pay attention and try to understand what your impact is on another person. This is you power. We are powerful beings in the world. Our every action has an impact. We all can become more aware of our impact, both good and bad, and think more clearly about what kind of impact we want to have in difficult situations. So let's talk about support. What can we do to support someone? It's a journey learning to overcome our hesitation to help, because sometimes we just feel like, oh, we're overstepping our bounds if we get involved. And we also have to learn how to be truly supportive, not to push our ideas and beliefs or to try and take over the situation and control the situation for them, because that's also another form of abuse. And to have a conversation with someone you're concerned about. And learning how to safely respond is a journey. It's not the role of the bystander to solve abuse for someone. We also want to learn how to have the conversation with the people we are worried about. So one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to learn to sync it. And that is the acronym that we use with the It's Not Right concept. We want to see it, we want to name it, and we want to check it. The overall strategy is to interrupt the isolation that exists in all abusive relationships by providing a practical tool and some tips for people closest to older adults who may be experiencing abuse. So once again, we're going to see it, we're going to name it, and we're going to check it. See it. It's not right. Notice when you feel uncomfortable. Did you feel uncomfortable when you were watching that scenario? Did you recognize some of the warning signs? And you need to learn about abuse so that you can know what those warning signs mean when they make you feel uncomfortable. Learn about abuse so you can recognize those warning signs and understand that abuse can be physical, but it can also be psychological, social, spiritual, and neglect. The warning signs are not always obvious. It's easy to ignore warning signs and to tell yourself that you must be mistaken or that it's not that bad because it's only one warning sign. Trust your instincts when you feel something makes you uncomfortable. Pay attention to red flags that could be warning signs. A warning sign is like seeing the tip of an iceberg. There is likely much more going on below the surface that you can't see. Some people think abuse is normal or understandable. Abuse is never acceptable and it always causes harm. When you see a warning sign, say to yourself, something isn't right. This will help you move on to the next step. And the next step is naming it. Michael moved you downstairs. Overcome your hesitation to help. Name the warning signs, just the facts. Don't make observations about facts. Just say, I have noticed. Name your concern. I'm worried about you. And talk to the older person or to someone you trust. Once you recognize the abuse, you may feel uncertain about becoming involved. You're not alone. It's understandable to hesitate, but you will need to overcome your hesitation to interrupt the isolation that Carla is experiencing. Abuse does not go away without help. If it's safe, talk to the person who you think is being abused, or wait for a time when you are alone and not likely to be interrupted. Approach the person with care and concern. Michael moved you downstairs. It's just a fact without any judgment. Describe just the facts of what you witnessed. For example, do say, I saw him take some money from your wallet. Don't use judgmental language like I saw him stealing money from your wallet. Remember just the facts. Find support for yourself. Talk to someone you trust about what to do next, or consult a professional. Just don't jump to conclusions or make judgments, because maybe, she gave him permission to take money from her wallet. Maybe she had said that she wanted to move downstairs, but we just want to be noting what we saw. Next, we want to check it. Are you okay? What can I do to help? We want everyone to pay attention and take the warning signs seriously. And a warning sign does not automatically mean that abuse is happening. Once again, don't jump to conclusions. If you see a warning sign, ask questions. Don't assume you know what's happening. It's also, if possible, check with the person you think is being abused first. That way it is a sync it conversation. Check for immediate danger. If it's a dangerous situation, call 911. If you have questions and want to speak to police, ask to speak to an officer who has been trained in domestic or family violence. So the sync it goal is to open the door for support. So what would happen next? And let's watch for the impact on Carla. This is Francesca, Carla's friend.
How are things going with your son being home? Oh, I feel badly for him. He's having such a hard time with it. He and his daughter moved upstairs on the weekends.
And where does that leave you?
I'm stabbing.
In the basement? Oh, I am sorry, but that is going too far. You still feel to his every whim when what he really needs is a swift kick in the pants. If you don't put your foot down, he's never going to leave that couch, never mind look for a job.
So was the door opened or closed for Carla? How did the response by Francesca make her feel? Did she feel like she could talk about what was going on? Or did she just get defensive and want to shut that door and not go any further with that discussion? Many people can understand Francesca's response. We can acknowledge that it's understandable to feel upset by what's happening and want to stop it. We can see the impact on Carla as she closes down. You can see it in her face and her body language. But if Francesca blames Carla for allowing the abuse to happen, then she's blaming Carla for her son's behavior. This is victim blaming, and it happens a lot. Blaming Carla will cause more hurt for Carla and for their friendship. It's not right to blame Carla for her son's behavior. It is never the victim's fault. It's not right to blame. Remember that when we talked about the power imbalance in the relationship, that puts Carla at a disadvantage. There are ageist attitudes and concern for her son. Do you think that Francesca generally cares about her friend and wants to help? I think she does. But if Francesca wants to be supportive, she has to change her response to open the door for Carla. We're now going to watch a second response where Francesca can try that response again.
How are things going with your son being home? Oh, I feel badly for him. He's having such a hard time with it. He and his daughter moved upstairs on the weekends.
And where does that leave you?
in the spare room.
In the basement? I'm worried about it. It's changed so much.
Do you believe in that scenario that the door was open for Carla to talk about what's going on? Remember, our goal is to be with Carla. What does she do that allows her to be with Carla? She sees a disorder in Carla's house and asks a question. She names her concern. She says, I'm worried about you. She listens without judgment, and she makes contact with Carla. She checks and asks the question, are you okay? So what will happen next? Did Francesca leave the door open for Carla? I think she did. Maybe she won't talk to her about it that day, but she may talk to her about it at another time. We don't always know what's going to happen next, but we can see from Carla's response that she appreciates her friend's concern. She may not want to talk anymore about what's happening, and that has to be okay with Francesca. Carla's life is not a problem for Francesca to solve. Carla has to decide what happens next. We have to move for doing for and to others and solving their problems. There's a shift from doing to responding. That means you have to pay attention to the person you want to support. Learn to look for the impact of your words and approach. Are you opening the door for support or closing it? People's faces and body language will tell you a lot if you pay attention. What do you think is going to happen next? Will Carla confide in her friend? It seems possible that that's a good outcome for Francesca. The door is open. Even if Carla does not go through the door, Francesca can feel good about trying and leaving the door open. Things may happen in Carla's time that take longer. Francesca should respect that, and if she sees new warning signs, she can sync it again. Francesca has interrupted the isolation, and that's the one important thing that Francesca did, was by seeing it, by naming it, and by checking it. In most cases, abuse is a spiral, and without interruption to the pattern, it tends to get worse and worse, as you can see. It will escalate, increase in frequency and severity. As the abuse increases, so does the isolation that the person feels that is being abused and the people perpetrating the abuse. The person experiencing it becomes more and more alone in the situation and less likely to be able to get help. So it's a simple strategy. We want to reduce or eliminate isolation. If isolation is always present in abuse, then interrupting the isolation is a strategy to reduce or eliminate it. We do this to provide support and increase safety. A sync it conversation is one way to reduce and interrupt isolation. It isn't just the people experiencing or causing abuse who are isolated. Neighbors, friends, and family members become isolated too, sitting alone with their concerns and their fears. If we are going to interrupt isolation wherever it occurs, then we can start with ourselves and the way we become isolated with our fears and concerns when we see abuse happening to someone and we don't do anything about it. So how to handle the sync it? You don't have to solve another person's problems. Instead, you can be their strong support. Responding to abuse does not mean that you solve it. There are two handles for a sync it conversation. One is safety and one is respect. Ask yourself, is it safe? Am I being respectful? You will want to wait for a time when the abusive person is not present. This is important for safety. In any sync it conversation where you want to find out if someone you care about is being abused, you want to open the way for the person to feel safe enough to talk with you. Listen carefully, ask questions. Don't expect the person to tell you the first time. It's really hard to admit that you're being abused. There is often a lot of shame in admitting it. If the person does start to talk, give them the time it takes to tell their story. It may not happen all at once. If the older adult says there's no abuse happening, don't press. There's no harm in voicing your concern, telling what you saw or heard without judgment, and then simply saying, I'm here if you need me. Your goal is to keep the door open. If not today, maybe later. Or maybe there really is no abuse. The last thing you want to do is to close the door on future conversations. You don't have to have it all figured out to talk to the older person. You don't have to know what to do. In fact, it's really up to the older adult to find out and figure out what they want to do. Your role is more of a supporting role. You want to be with the person. If you just start from the place of care and concern, you will be more successful in opening the way for them to disclose what is happening. I saw something happen that made me concerned. I'm worried about you. These are good things to say. The natural tendency of most people is to solve the problem for the other person. It is understandable, but will create safety issues and could hurt your relationship. Remember that safety is always a priority. Solving is a safety issue. Relationships are complex and rushing to judgment. You can't push people to do things they don't really feel ready to do, and that can increase risk. Solving can be a subtle form of victim blaming. Solving can be disrespectful because it assumes the other person is not capable. Recognize the ways you drive your own solution up in a relationship can help you make conscious choices to be more supportive, which is probably what you really want. Trust that being with another person is a powerful interruption in abusive relationships. Solving it does not include seeking professional advice for themselves or calling police if a criminal activity is taking place. So if you feel that that they're at high risk and it needs to be some sort of other involvement that does have to take place, that their safety is at risk, it's imminent danger, then that's a time to call someone else in to help. So the warning steps for sync it. See it. Notice when something makes you feel not right. Talk to someone, and the older adults should be the first person you talk to. What are the warning signs? Name your concern. Check it. Ask questions. Are you okay? Do you want to talk about it? Keep that door open. And remember that in any intervention, you have to hold on to the two handles, safety and respect. Is it safe? Is my action respectful? See it, name it, check it, sync it. Be prepared for disclosures. If someone tells you they're being abused, here are some helpful things that you can say. The first thing you want to be always saying is, I believe you. Don't try to minimize what they're telling. Don't try to say, oh, that can't be right. You need to listen and say, I believe you. You need to make sure that they understand that the abuse is not their fault. It doesn't matter what they've said or done. No one has the right to be abusive towards them. It's important to say that you're worried about them and you're worried about their safety. And you also need to let them know that you will support them in their decisions and that you're there for them and that they can talk to you. If you're the one that's being abused, threatened, or hurt, tell someone you trust. You are the expert in your own life and the best person to decide what you can do to set limits and to increase your safety. Make a safety plan that includes where you can go in an emergency and what you will take with you. Agencies like ours, Victim Services, we're here to help with safety plans and to help people figure out what they can do to keep themselves safe, even if they're continuing to remain in an abusive relationship. And we can also help them work on how to get out of that relationship if that's what they decide that they want to do. If you were being abused, how would you want to be treated? Ask yourself that if you were the person being abused. What would you want in support from your neighbors, your friends, and your family? These are some of the resources available provincially across the province. Locally, Victim Services of Brant is a good resource. Obviously, the Grand River Council on Aging is a good resource. Places like the Alzheimer's Society can be good resources. There are a lot of places out there that you can go to for help. Family doctors can also be helpful in some of these situations. So just keep that in mind and know that there are places that you can go for help. We're all a part of our community. Change happens in everyday ways. We want to engage the power and potential of relationships to make change in the lives of people who are experiencing abuse. It's Not Right, Neighbors, Friends, and Family for Older Abuse has been created to support you in taking safe and effective action when abuse is happening to someone you care about. If we just use our existing networks of relationships to spread the information and to generate discussions on this complex issue with people we know and care about, we will be achieving our goals. We all have a role to play in creating a safe, supportive community that we all want to live and grow old in. We're all connected. And everything you do has an impact. It makes a difference. What kind of difference do you want to make? You may never know what that little gesture of kindness you make towards someone might make a difference for that person. For every person who takes action of any kind, it's impossible to know how far the information will travel and who will be affected. Tell someone you know about this campaign. Carry the brochure, and Linda's going to be sending it out to you. Every action adds up to something greater than any one of us can achieve alone. Together, we can make positive change in our communities that recognizes each person's basic human right to live free from any abuse of any kind. Final thoughts. You don't have to be a hero. You don't have to fix the situation. Just caring about the people around us, paying attention to them, and noticing when there are signs of trouble and responding appropriately can make a big difference. Every little bit counts. And we each have the power to make change. So join us in the It's Not Right campaign for social change. Things that you can do. You can be a supporter. You can pay attention to warning signs. You can learn how to sync it. You can be an advocate. You can tell people about our workshop and It's Not Right. And if you are so inclined, you can become a presenter and get trained on providing the It's Not Right presentation. Report back and start the movement. Talk to people that you know and let them know about it. And I just want to thank Elder Abuse Ontario for providing, developing this presentation, and they worked with Western on the Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children, and it was funded by the provincial government. So that's the end of my presentation, and at this point in time, I'm going to stop the share, and I'll be open for any questions.